The September morning in New York carried that particular weight of transition, when summer's dying breath mingles with autumn's first whispers, creating an atmosphere where everything seems possible and nothing feels certain. Detective Michael Shaw stood at the intersection of Broadway and 42nd Street, watching the river of humanity flow past him with the indifference of water around a stone. Each face that passed was a universe of secrets, each stride a rhythm of hidden purposes, and somewhere in this ocean of anonymity, young women were vanishing without leaving so much as a ripple. The weight of his sister's absence pressed against his chest like a physical thing, a hollow space that had carved itself into his being 7 years ago, when Rebecca had stepped out of their childhood home in Queens and dissolved into the city's vast indifference. No body, no evidence, no explanation, just an empty bedroom and a family photograph she'd left turned face down on her dresser, as if she couldn't bear to look at who she was leaving behind. That photograph now lived in Michael's jacket pocket, worn soft from years of unconscious touching, a talisman against the fear that he was chasing echoes of his own unresolved grief rather than solving cases. The current case file rested heavy in his hands. 3 women, aged 22 to 28, all vanished within the last 6 months from different boroughs, their only connection a haunting similarity in how completely they had ceased to exist. Sarah Chen, a medical student from Columbia, had left her anatomy textbook open on her desk, a cup of coffee still warm, her cell phone charging on her bed. Monica Rivera, a dancer from the Bronx, had disappeared between the theater and the subway station, a journey of 3 blocks that had somehow stretched into infinity. Lisa Patterson, a Wall Street analyst, had sent an email at 9:47 p.m. from her office. Security footage showed her leaving at 9:52 p.m., and then nothing. The city had swallowed them whole, digesting them so completely that even their absence seemed to fade from collective memory. Michael's partner, Detective Ray Torres, had called it quits after 2 months of investigation, transferring to robbery with barely concealed relief. Some cases, Ray had said, not meeting Michael's eyes, they're not meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that the city keeps its own counsel and we're just visitors in its dreams. But Michael couldn't accept that, couldn't let these women join Rebecca in that liminal space between the living and the acknowledged dead. His phone vibrated with a text from Captain Jennifer Reeves. "Journalist waiting in your office, says she has information. Play nice." Michael grimaced. Journalists were vultures in his experience, feeding on tragedy and transforming grief into headlines. But as he made his way back to the precinct, something in the city's rhythm seemed to shift, as if New York itself was holding its breath, waiting for pieces to align that had been scattered across time and intention. Emma Porter sat in his office like she owned it, her presence filling the space with an energy that made the familiar room feel foreign. She was perhaps 35, with auburn hair that caught the fluorescent light in ways that seemed to defy the harsh institutional lighting, and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who had looked too deeply into humanity's darker corners and found themselves reflected there. Her clothes were expensive, but worn carelessly. Designer jeans and a blazer that had seen too many late nights and early mornings, the uniform of someone who had once played by society's rules before realizing the game was rigged. "Detective Shaw," she said, standing with a grace that suggested formal training somewhere in her past. "I'm Emma Porter. I used to write for the Times, until I made the mistake of suggesting that certain disappearances in this city weren't random, that there was a pattern everyone was deliberately ignoring." Michael settled behind his desk, studying her with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned to read danger in the space between words. "And what pattern would that be, Ms. Porter?" She pulled out a laptop, its surface covered with stickers from various protests and causes, a roadmap of idealism slowly being tempered by reality. "Over the last 5 years, 37 women have vanished in ways that defy statistical probability. No bodies, no ransom demands, no digital footprint after disappearance. But here's what interested me. She turned the screen toward him, showing a map of New York with red dots scattered across it. They all disappeared within a 3-block radius of major transit hubs, always between 9 and 11 p.m., always on nights when the moon was new. You're suggesting someone is using lunar cycles to hunt. Michael's tone carried the skepticism of a man who dealt in facts, not patterns that bordered on the mystical. Emma's laugh was bitter coffee and sleepless nights. I'm suggesting someone understands that darkness isn't just absence of light, detective. It's presence of opportunity. New moon nights in New York create specific conditions. Shadows are deeper, security cameras struggle more, and most importantly, people move differently in true darkness. They cluster, they hurry, they become predictable. She pulled up another screen, this one showing security footage from Penn Station dated 3 weeks ago. This is 20 minutes before Monica Rivera disappeared. Watch the crowds. Michael leaned forward, seeing nothing at first but the usual chaos of evening commuters. Then Emma pointed to a figure, nondescript in dark clothing, moving against the flow of traffic with purposeful calm. Now watch how people unconsciously move away from him, creating a bubble of space. It's subtle, but consistent. The same figure appears in footage from 2 other disappearances, always maintaining that strange repulsion field, as if people's instincts recognize a predator even when their conscious minds don't. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach, a recognition that went beyond professional interest. You're saying evil has a presence that people can sense, but not see? I'm saying, Emma replied, closing the laptop with deliberate finality, that whoever is taking these women has learned to weaponize urban anonymity. They're not hiding from the crowd. They're using it as camouflage, moving through spaces where 1,000 witnesses see nothing because they're all looking at their phones, lost in their own worlds, assuming someone else will notice if something's wrong. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Michael pulled out Rebecca's photograph, placing it on the desk between them. 7 years ago, my sister disappeared. No new moon, no transit hub, just gone. But the feeling you're describing, that unconscious recognition of wrongness, I've been feeling it every day since, like the city knows what happened but refuses to tell. Emma's expression softened, the journalist's mask slipping to reveal something more human underneath. That's why I came to you specifically, detective. Your captain thinks you're obsessed, your former partner thinks you're broken, but I think you're the only cop in this city who understands that some truths are felt before they're known. And we're going to need that intuition, because whoever we're hunting has had years to perfect their invisibility. As she stood to leave, Emma placed a business card on his desk, but it wasn't printed. It was handwritten, the letters careful and deliberate. My real number, she said. The one I don't give to sources or editors. We're going to find these women, Detective Shaw, or we're going to find out why the city doesn't want them found. Either way, we're going to learn what it means when evil doesn't hide in shadows, but walks freely in broad daylight, wearing the face of just another stranger in the crowd. After she left, Michael sat alone in his office as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of amber and ash. He thought about Rebecca, about Sarah Chen and Monica Rivera and Lisa Patterson, about all the women who had stepped out of their lives and into some terrible absence. He thought about Emma Porter and her map of disappearances, about patterns that only made sense if you accepted that predators could evolve beyond recognition, becoming something that existed in the spaces between attention. The city hummed its evening song outside his window, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in an endless dance of purpose and chance. Somewhere out there, perhaps even visible from where he sat, walked someone who had learned to disappear not by hiding, but by becoming so ordinary, so unremarkable, that they achieved a kind of terrible transcendence, evil that had learned to vanish, not into darkness, but into the blinding ordinariness of day. The abandoned warehouse in Red Hook stood like a monument to Brooklyn's industrial past, its broken windows reflecting the grey October sky in fragments that never quite formed a complete picture. Emma Porter had insisted they meet here, away from the precinct's institutional walls and watching eyes, in a space where truths too large for official reports might have room to breathe. Michael arrived to find her already there, surrounded by bankers' boxes and corkboards that transformed the empty space into a makeshift investigation room that felt more honest than any police facility he'd worked in. "You know what I love about abandoned places?" Emma said, without turning as he approached, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "They're honest about their emptiness. Not like the rest of the city, pretending fullness while being hollow at the core." She was pinning photographs to a board, images of women who looked hauntingly similar, not in features, but in something ineffable, a quality of light in their eyes, or the way they held their shoulders, as if they all carried the same invisible weight. Michael studied the display, his trained eye catching patterns his mind wasn't ready to articulate. "These aren't all from the official missing persons files." "No," Emma confirmed, stepping back to survey her work. "Some of these go back 15 years. Women who disappeared but didn't quite. Their families were told they'd run away, or their cases were closed as probable suicides despite no bodies ever being found. The system has a remarkable ability to forget what it doesn't want to remember." She moved to another board, this one covered with maps, subway schedules, and moon charts that created a complex geometry of possibility. "After the Times fired me for pursuing conspiracy theories without factual basis, I couldn't let it go. I liquidated my 401k, sold my apartment in the Upper West Side, and I've spent the last 2 years living in a studio in Chinatown that's smaller than my former walk-in closet, all to understand this." "Why?" Michael asked, though he recognized the obsession in her eyes. It was the same thing he saw in his own mirror each morning. Emma pulled out a photograph from her jacket, worn and creased from handling. It showed 2 young girls, perhaps 8 and 10, laughing at something beyond the frame. "My younger sister, Amy. Not disappeared, not taken. She killed herself 6 years ago. Left a note that said she couldn't stand living in a world where someone could watch you every day, know your routines, your vulnerabilities, and you'd never know until it was too late. She'd become convinced someone was stalking her, but the police said there was no evidence. 3 months after her death, her best friend vanished. Same pattern as these women. The weight of parallel grief settled between them like a third presence." Michael understood now why Emma's investigation felt different from typical journalism. She wasn't hunting a story, but a revelation, the kind that could retroactively transform loss from meaningless to meaningful, even if that meaning was terrible. "I found something else," Emma continued, moving to a laptop that looked like it had been rebuilt from spare parts. "I've been tracking social media posts from the weeks before each disappearance. Nothing obvious, but there's a linguistic pattern. Each woman started using specific phrases they'd never used before. Walking through shadows, feeling hollow, the crowd seems empty, as if they were sensing something their conscious minds couldn't process." Michael examined the data, his detective's instincts firing in directions that training had never prepared him for. "You're suggesting they were being psychologically prepared somehow?" "I'm suggesting," Emma said carefully, "that predation has evolved. We're not looking for someone who grabs women off the street. We're looking for someone who makes them complicit in their own disappearance, who creates conditions where vanishing seems like the only logical choice." A sound echoed through the warehouse, footsteps on metal stairs. Both turned, hands moving instinctively to weapons, his service pistol, her pepper spray. But the figure that emerged from the shadows was neither threat nor stranger. It was Dr. Marcus Webb, a psychiatrist who'd consulted on several of Michael's cases before abruptly retiring 3 years ago. "Dr. Webb," Michael couldn't hide his surprise. The man looked older than his 60 years, his once precise appearance now disheveled, his eyes holding the particular exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much truth. "Detective Shaw, Ms. Porter," Webb nodded to each. "Emma contacted me last week. I've been reluctant to involve myself, but conscience is a cruel master." He moved into the light and Michael noticed his hands trembled slightly. 3 years ago, I was treating a patient who claimed to have developed a technique for what he called urban dissolution. He said he could move through crowds completely unnoticed, that he'd learned to exist in the spaces between people's attention. Emma leaned forward intently. "What was his name?" "That's just it," Webb replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "I can't remember. I have detailed notes from every other patient I've ever treated, but his file is missing, and when I try to recall his face, it's like trying to hold water. The harder I grasp, the less remains." Michael felt the investigation shifting beneath his feet, moving from the realm of conventional crime into something far more unsettling. "You're saying he somehow erased himself from your memory?" Webb pulled out a journal, its pages covered with attempts to sketch a face that never quite cohered. "Not erased, dispersed. It's all still there, but scattered like a puzzle with pieces that refuse to connect. But I remember what he told me in our last session. He said the city was full of people who wanted to disappear, who carried dissolution in their hearts like a secret wish. All he did was help them achieve what they already desired." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic, the city's endless circulation that suddenly seemed less like life and more like something being slowly digested. Emma moved to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. "We're not hunting a serial killer in the traditional sense. We're hunting someone who's weaponized urban alienation, who's turned the city's indifference into a tool." Michael joined her at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the dirty glass. "The question is, how do you catch someone who might be standing right next to you and you'd never know?" "You don't," Webb said quietly. "You create conditions where they have to become visible. You make the invisible reveal itself by disrupting the patterns it depends on." Emma turned from the window, her expression sharp with sudden understanding. "The new moon is in 3 days. If the pattern holds, someone will disappear. But this time, we'll be watching differently. Not for someone taking a woman, but for the moment when a woman begins to fade, when she starts becoming complicit in her own vanishing." They spent the next hours planning, creating a network of observation that focused not on individuals, but on spaces, on the negative zones where attention naturally avoided. Michael felt the investigation taking on an almost ritualistic quality, as if they were preparing not for an arrest, but for an exorcism of something that had possessed the city itself. As night fell, Webb prepared to leave but paused at the door. "Detective, there's something else. In our sessions, this patient said something that's haunted me. He said the city doesn't just hide evil, it creates it, shapes it, evolves it. Every generation, predators adapt to new forms of camouflage. He claimed he was just the latest iteration, and that after him would come something even more invisible." After Webb left, Michael and Emma remained in the warehouse, surrounded by their maps and theories. The city lights sparkled beyond the windows, beautiful and terrible, millions of lives creating a constellation of possibility and threat. "Your sister," Emma said suddenly. "Tell me about the day she disappeared." Michael was quiet for a long moment, then spoke slowly, carefully, as if the words might shatter if spoken too forcefully. "She'd been different for weeks. Distant, like she was already half gone. The morning she disappeared, she hugged me, which she never did, and said, 'Some people are meant to be remembered. Others are meant to be forgotten. I finally know which one I am.'" Emma's hand found his in the darkness, a connection between two people who understood that some losses create absences that become presences, that grief could evolve into something like radar, detecting frequencies of sorrow that others couldn't perceive. "We're going to find them," she said, and he wasn't sure if she meant the missing women or the answers that might make their sisters' absences bearable. Outside, New York continued its eternal transformation. Millions of strangers passing each other in careful choreography, never touching, never quite seeing. Each one a potential victim or predator or witness, all of them dissolving and reforming in patterns too complex for any one consciousness to grasp. And somewhere in that massive organism of steel and flesh and endless motion, someone had learned to move like a virus through a body, invisible not because they were hidden, but because they'd become identical to the system itself. The Prometheus Club occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Madison Avenue that most New Yorkers walked past without seeing, its entrance so discreetly marked that it seemed to repel attention, like opposing magnets. Emma had discovered its existence in financial records that connected several of the missing women, small payments labeled as consultation fees that traced back to this address. Now, on the night before the new moon, she and Michael stood in an oak-paneled room that felt removed from time, facing a man who introduced himself only as Mr. Gray. "Detective Shaw, Ms. Porter," Gray said, his voice carrying the particular confidence of old money and older secrets. "We've been expecting you. Not you specifically, but someone like you, investigators who've begun to see the patterns we've been tracking for decades." He was perhaps 70, with the kind of preserved appearance that suggested excellent medical care and careful living, but his eyes held depths that seemed much older. The room was a library, though the books on its shelves weren't titles Michael recognized. Journals mostly, handwritten accounts bound in leather that looked ancient despite the modern office building that contained them. Gray pulled one from a shelf, opening it to reveal pages covered in meticulous handwriting. "The Prometheus Club was founded in 1847, he began, by men who noticed that New York was creating new forms of human behavior, new ways of being that hadn't existed before the modern city emerged. We've been documenting what we call urban evolution, the ways that city living fundamentally changes human consciousness." Emma stepped forward, her journalistic instincts overriding caution. "You're saying you've known about the disappearances?" "We've known about the phenomenon," Gray corrected. "Every generation, the city produces individuals who adapt too perfectly to urban life. They become something between human and system, able to navigate the city's patterns in ways that make them essentially invisible. We call them urban wraiths. Not supernatural, but natural evolution taken to an extreme." Michael felt his skepticism warring with the evidence he'd seen. "And you've done nothing to stop them?" Gray's expression grew complex, mixing regret with something that might have been fear. "How do you stop evolution, Detective? How do you arrest adaptation itself? We've tried, and each intervention only causes the phenomenon to evolve further. The current iteration, the one you're hunting, is the most sophisticated we've encountered." He led them to another room, this one containing what looked like a command center, with screens showing feeds from cameras throughout the city. But these weren't security cameras. They were positioned to capture negative spaces, the areas between normal surveillance. 3 years ago, Gray continued, one of our members, Dr. Harrison Vance, believed he'd identified the current wraith, but instead of capturing him, Vance disappeared. His body was found 6 months later in the Hudson, but the coroner couldn't determine cause of death. It was as if he'd simply stopped. Emma was studying the screens, her face pale in the electronic glow. "These feeds, you're watching for the next disappearance." "We're watching for the pattern to manifest," Gray confirmed. "Tonight, if precedent holds, someone will begin the process of vanishing. Not taken, but transitioning from visible to invisible, from person to absence." Michael moved closer to the screens, seeing the city from angles he'd never considered. "Why are you showing us this? Why now?" Gray was quiet for a moment, then spoke with visible difficulty. "Because we recently discovered something that changes everything. The Wraith isn't selecting victims randomly. Each woman who disappears shares a specific psychological profile. They're all what we call natural dissociators, people who have an inherent ability to disconnect from reality. The Wraith isn't taking them. It's teaching them to become like itself. The implication hit both investigators simultaneously. Emma spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're saying the missing women aren't dead. They're transformed." "We believe," Gray said carefully, "that they've learned to exist in the urban interstices, the spaces between attention. They're still in the city, but they've become functionally invisible, living in plain sight but beyond perception." A younger man entered the room carrying a tablet. "Mr. Gray, we're detecting an anomaly at Grand Central. The patterns are forming." The screens shifted to show various angles of Grand Central Terminal, the evening rush in full swing. Thousands of people moved through the space in complex patterns, but the Prometheus Club's software was highlighting something else. Areas where the flow of human traffic unconsciously diverted, creating pockets of emptiness that moved through the crowd like bubbles through water. "There," the younger man pointed to one screen. A woman, perhaps 25, standing near the information booth, but somehow apart from everything around her. People moved past without seeing her, their eyes sliding away as if she occupied a blind spot in collective vision. Michael recognized her from his files. "That's Jennifer Huang. She was reported missing 3 days ago." "No," Gray corrected. "She was reported missing 3 days ago. But look at the timestamp on this feed. This is happening right now." Emma grabbed Michael's arm. "We have to go there. We have to—" "If you approach her, she'll vanish completely," Gray warned. "The transformation isn't complete. Disruption now could cause her to dissolve entirely, becoming truly irretrievable." They watched, helpless, as Jennifer Huang began to move through the station, her motion somehow out of phase with everyone around her. She wasn't walking so much as flowing, occupying spaces that seemed to exist between moments, visible only because they knew to look for her. Then Michael saw something that made his blood freeze. Another figure moving in the same impossible way, following Jennifer but also guiding her, like a shepherd directing a sheep towards some invisible fold. The figure turned toward one of the cameras, and for just a moment, Michael saw a face that wouldn't quite resolve in his vision, features that seemed to scatter the moment he tried to focus on them. "That's him," Webb said from behind them. None had heard him enter. "That's my patient. I can almost see him now, through the screens. It's like looking at him through a filter that makes him partially visible." Emma was already moving, heading for the door. "We're not just going to watch. There has to be something." "There is," Gray said, producing a set of modified glasses. "These were Dr. Vance's project. They filter out the primary visual spectrum and enhance peripheral vision. They might allow you to see what others can't. But wearing them for too long causes severe disorientation. The human brain isn't meant to process reality this way." Michael took a pair, feeling their weight. "How long can we wear them?" 20 minutes, maybe 30 before the effects become permanent. After that, you risk becoming like them, seeing the interstitial reality but losing connection to the consensual one." They left the Prometheus Club and raced toward Grand Central, the city lights blurring past, like memories being erased. Michael drove while Emma studied the feeds on her phone, tracking Jennifer and her guide as they moved through the terminal's maze. "They're heading for the lower level," she reported. "Track 61, the abandoned presidential platform." Michael knew it. A hidden track built for FDR, officially decommissioned but never sealed, one of New York's many spaces that existed in the margins of official reality. They entered Grand Central through a service entrance Webb had provided access to. The terminal's grandeur transformed into something maze-like and oppressive when approached from its utilitarian angles. The glasses turned the world into something alien. Michael could see the crowds, but also the spaces between them, the negative zones where attention never fell. These spaces were inhabited. Figures moved through them, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all existing in the urban blind spots, visible only through the filtered lenses. "My God," Emma breathed beside him. "They're all here, all the missing women. They're not gone, they're parallel." They found Track 61 by following the absence of security, the spaces where cameras didn't quite cover and guards never patrolled. Jennifer Huang stood at the platform's edge, her guide beside her, both flickering between visible and invisible, as if existence itself had become voluntary. The guide turned toward them, and through the glasses his face finally resolved. He was ordinary, devastatingly ordinary, the kind of face that would never trigger memory, that existed in the space between memorable and forgettable. "Detective Shaw," he said, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I wondered when you'd develop the ability to see. Your sister did eventually. She's here, you know. Not gone, just translated." Michael felt his world shatter and rebuild in an instant. "Rebecca?" A figure stepped from the shadows, and even through the distorting glasses he knew her. Rebecca, his sister, but changed, existing in that same phase-shifted reality as the others. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice carrying across years and dimensions of loss. "I wanted to tell you, but how do you explain becoming something that doesn't have words? We're not missing, we're evolved. We're what the city has been building toward all along, humans who can exist in the spaces between attention, free from the weight of being constantly observed and categorized." Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Amy? Is Amy here?" "No," the guide said, not unkindly. "Not everyone can make the transition. Some, like Amy, sense the possibility but can't achieve it. The contradiction drives them to other escapes." The glasses were starting to burn, the disorientation growing. Michael could feel himself beginning to drift, to see the appeal of dissolution, of stepping out of the exhausting performance of visibility. Beside him, Emma was swaying, caught between realities. "You have to choose," the guide said. "Remove the glasses and return to your consensual blindness, or keep them on and join us in the truth of urban existence. But choose quickly. The transition, once begun, cannot be reversed." Michael looked at Rebecca, at the peace in her translated existence, at the freedom from the weight of being. Then he looked at Emma, at her struggle between truth and madness, between finding answers and losing herself to them. In that moment, he understood that evil hadn't vanished into the crowd. It had evolved beyond the concept of evil entirely, becoming something that transcended moral categories, something that offered escape from the prison of individual consciousness into the collective unconscious of the city itself. The choice hung before them like a door that, once opened, could never be closed again. Michael's hand found the glasses, fingers trembling against the modified frames as two realities warred for dominance in his vision. Through the lenses, he saw Rebecca reaching toward him, her hand extended in invitation to existence beyond the suffocating weight of visibility. Without them, he knew, she would vanish again, perhaps forever. The 20 minutes Gray had warned them about were nearly gone. He could feel the disorientation settling into his neural pathways like cement, threatening to make the interstitial vision permanent. Emma stood frozen beside him, her breath coming in short gasps as she stared at something only she could see through her own glasses. "They're beautiful," she whispered, and Michael understood she wasn't seeing missing women, but transformed beings, creatures who had evolved beyond the brutal necessities of urban survival. They don't have to perform anymore, don't have to be anything for anyone. The guide, Michael still couldn't hold his name in memory, if he'd ever given one, moved with liquid grace through the abandoned station. Every generation, the city calls certain souls to transcend. The indigenous peoples who first lived here knew this. They had words for those who walked between worlds. "We're not an anomaly, detective. We're a natural consequence of forcing millions of consciousnesses into proximity. Some learn to exist in the spaces between." Track 61 seemed to pulse with invisible life. Through the glasses, Michael could see dozens of figures, maybe hundreds, all existing in that phase-shifted reality. Some he recognized from missing persons files, others were strangers, but all shared that same quality of peaceful dissolution, as if they'd finally exhaled after holding their breath for a lifetime. But Jennifer Huang... Michael forced himself to focus on why they'd come, even as his vision swam. She didn't choose this, You're taking them. Taking? The guide's laugh was like wind through empty buildings. I'm offering. Every woman who's joined us was already halfway gone, already feeling the unbearable weight of being constantly observed, categorized, consumed by the city's endless appetite for identity. I simply show them the door they were already looking for. Rebecca moved closer, and Michael could smell her perfume, the same vanilla and jasmine she'd worn since high school. It was devastatingly real, this ghost of his sister, this evolution of her. I wrote you letters, she said softly. Hundreds of them, trying to explain. But how do you describe water to someone dying of thirst in the desert? How do you explain that disappearing isn't death, but a different kind of life? Emma suddenly yanked off her glasses, gasping as consensual reality crashed back. The track appeared empty, except for them and the guide, who flickered at the edges of perception like a floater in the eye. No, she said firmly, this isn't evolution. It's seduction. You're not freeing them, you're erasing them. From what? The guide asked, genuinely curious. From jobs that consume them, relationships that diminish them, a society that values them only as commodities. Tell me, Miss Porter, what exactly are they losing? Michael felt the weight of the question, the terrible logic of it. He thought of the women in his files. Their lives before disappearance. Sarah Chen, pushing herself through medical school while battling depression. Monica Rivera, dancing through chronic pain because it was the only thing that paid rent. Lisa Patterson, working 100-hour weeks for men who couldn't remember her name, but then he thought of their families, their friends, the ones left behind to wonder and grieve and blame themselves. He thought of his parents, aged beyond their years from Rebecca's absence, his mother still setting a place for her at holiday dinners. They're losing the chance to change things, Michael said, his voice stronger than he felt, to fight back, to make the world better instead of abandoning it. The guide's expression, what Michael could perceive of it, seemed almost sad, spoken like someone who still believes the world wants to be better. But you're a detective, Mr. Shaw. You've seen what humans do to each other. Is it really so wrong to offer an alternative? Jennifer Huang had moved to the very edge of the platform, balanced between dimensions. Through the glasses, Michael could see her wavering, not physically but existentially, her very being uncertain of which reality to inhabit. Jennifer, Emma called out, though Michael wasn't sure the woman could hear across the dimensional divide. Your mother is looking for you. She posts on message boards every day, sharing your photo, your poetry. She says you wrote about wanting to change the world through your words. Is this the change you meant? For a moment, Jennifer solidified, became more present. Her eyes, when they found Emma's, were filled with a confusion that transcended the interstitial state. My mother, she loves you, Emma continued, stepping forward despite the danger. Not the performance of you, not the productivity of you. Just you. That love exists in the regular world, the hard world, the visible world. It can't follow you where you're going. The guide moved between them, his presence somehow expanding to fill space that shouldn't have been able to contain a single person. Love is just another chain, another weight. We're offering freedom from all of it. No, Michael said, finally understanding. You're offering annihilation disguised as transcendence. These women aren't evolved. They're traumatized into dissolution. You're not a guide. You're a predator who's learned to hunt souls instead of bodies. The temperature in the abandoned station seemed to drop. Through the glasses, Michael saw the transformed women stirring, agitation rippling through their translated existence. Rebecca turned to him, and for the first time since she'd appeared, he saw doubt in her phase-shifted eyes. Michael, she said, what if you're wrong? What if this is better? He pulled off his glasses, accepting the loss of her image for the clarity of conviction. Then it's still a choice that should be made freely, with full knowledge, not through manipulation and gradual dissolution. Rebecca, if you chose this, really chose it, then I'll accept it. But did you choose, or were you groomed into believing you had no other option? The silence that followed felt like the city itself, holding its breath. Without the glasses, Michael could barely perceive Rebecca. just a shimmer where she stood, a distortion in the air that might have been imagination. But he heard her when she spoke, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I don't know anymore. I've been gone so long I can't remember what it felt like to be solid." Emma had put her glasses back on, risking permanent damage to maintain visual contact with Jennifer. "It's not too late," she said urgently. "You can come back. Both of you can come back. It will be hard, maybe the hardest thing you've ever done, but you can reclaim visibility, reclaim presence." The guide laughed, but there was something different in it now, a note of uncertainty. "You don't understand what you're asking. The transition isn't reversible. Once you've learned to exist between attention, you can't unlearn it." "That's not true," a new voice said, and Dr. Webb stepped from the shadows of the platform, wearing his own pair of modified glasses. "I've been studying this phenomenon for longer than you know. The consciousness is plastic, adaptable. With therapy, with support, with gradual reintegration, the translated can become solid again. I've seen it happen." "You've seen failures," the guide spat, his composure finally cracking. "Partial returns that leave them neither here nor there, driven mad by existing between states." "Like Amy," Emma said quietly, understanding flooding her features. "She started to transition but couldn't complete it. That's why she chose another form of disappearance." The platform began to vibrate, a subtle thrumming that seemed to come from the city itself. Through the abandoned station's speakers, impossible though they hadn't functioned in decades, came the announcement of an incoming train. But no train was scheduled for track 61, hadn't been for 60 years. "It's time," the guide said, his form solidifying as if preparing for departure. "The city is calling us deeper. Those who are coming, come now. Those who are staying, remove the glasses and forget what you've seen." Jennifer Huang stood at the crossroads of realities, pulled between dimensions. Through sheer will and the last moments of enhanced vision before the glasses would cause permanent damage, Emma reached out and grasped Jennifer's hand, the contact bridging realities. "Choose the hard world," Emma pleaded. "Choose the world where your mother's love can reach you." Jennifer screamed, a sound that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and then she collapsed onto the platform, fully visible, fully present, sobbing with the overwhelming sensation of returning to singular existence. The guide snarled, moving toward them with inhuman speed, but Michael was ready. He couldn't see the man clearly without the glasses, but he could feel the distortion of his presence, the way reality bent around him. He tackled the space where physics suggested impossible and connected with something solid that shouldn't have been there. They crashed to the platform, the guide's invisibility flickering like a broken television. For a moment, just a moment, his face was completely visible, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of face that would disappear in any crowd. But his eyes held depths of loneliness that seemed infinite, the isolation of someone who had learned to exist between worlds but belonged to neither. "You don't understand," he gasped, struggling against Michael's grip. "I'm not the cause. I'm just a symptom. The city creates us, needs us, to process the ones who can't survive its weight. There will be others after me, evolved even further, even more invisible." The phantom train's approach grew louder, and through the last seconds of his enhanced vision, before he tore the glasses off, Michael saw them. Hundreds of translated beings boarding something that existed outside normal space-time, Rebecca among them. She turned back once, her hand raised in what might have been farewell or might have been invitation, and then she was gone, truly gone this time, choosing her dissolution over the painful possibility of return. The guide dissolved under Michael's grip, not disappearing but dispersing, becoming so distributed across the urban infrastructure that no single point of him remained solid enough to hold. His last words echoed from every speaker, every pipe, every electrical conduit in the station. "You've saved one, but the city is hungry, and there are always those willing to be consumed." Then silence. Jennifer Huang lay unconscious but breathing on the platform. Emma cradled the young woman's head, tears streaming down her face, for Jennifer, for Amy, for all the women who had been offered escape and had taken it, not understanding they were trading one form of invisibility for another. Dr. Webb was already on his phone, calling for medical support, using connections from his Prometheus Club association. "She'll need intensive therapy," he said quietly. "Learning to exist singularly again after experiencing multiplication is difficult, but possible." Michael stood at the platform's edge, looking into the tunnel where no train had come, where Rebecca had boarded something that existed beyond his ability to perceive or pursue. The case was solved and unsolved simultaneously. They'd saved Jennifer Huang, exposed the pattern, identified the predator even if they couldn't contain him. But the missing women remained missing, translated into something beyond recovery, and the city continued its ancient process of evolution, creating new forms of human existence that transcended human understanding. 3 days later, Michael sat in his office, writing a report that would never capture the truth of what they'd discovered. How did you explain to a bureaucracy that evil hadn't vanished into the crowd but had evolved beyond the concept of evil itself, that the missing women weren't dead but translated, that the city itself was complicit in their transformation? Emma had written her own version of the story, one that spoke of urban alienation and the vulnerability of those who felt unseen, unvalued, unnecessary. It would win awards, change conversations about mental health and urban planning, but it would never mention the interstitial reality, the translated beings, the guide who existed distributed across the city's infrastructure. Jennifer Huang recovered slowly, requiring constant support to maintain her singular existence. She spoke of her time in the translated state as one might speak of a dream, beautiful and terrible and impossible to fully remember or forget. Her mother never left her side, anchoring her to consensual reality with the weight of unconditional love. Dr. Webb returned to practice, specializing in what he carefully termed dissociative urban disorders, helping those who felt themselves beginning to fade, beginning to hear the city's call to dissolution. He never mentioned the glasses or the translated beings, but he saved lives by teaching people to choose the difficult visibility over the seductive invisibility. The Prometheus Club continued its work, monitoring the negative spaces, watching for new evolutionary adaptations. They sent Michael reports occasionally, noting patterns that suggested the guide's prediction was accurate. New forms of urban predation were emerging, even more sophisticated, even more invisible. And Michael, he kept Rebecca's photograph on his desk, no longer hidden in his pocket, but displayed openly. A reminder that some people choose to vanish and others are chosen by their vanishing. He continued to investigate disappearances, but now he understood that not all missing people were lost, and not all lost people were missing. On quiet nights, when the city's hum reached certain frequencies, he could almost hear them, the translated ones, existing in the spaces between attention, neither saved nor damned, but transformed into something that transcended human categories. He wondered if Rebecca was happy, if happiness even applied to what she'd become. The case file officially remained open, as did 36 others, women who had vanished into the crowd and become the crowd, their absence a presence that haunted the city's unconscious. Evil hadn't vanished. It had evolved, adapted, become indigenous to the urban environment in ways that made it indistinguishable from the environment itself. But so had good. Emma's articles sparked support groups for those who felt themselves fading. Dr. Webb's practice grew to include other therapists learning to recognize the signs of impending translation. Jennifer Huang, once recovered, became an advocate for mental health resources. Her near disappearance transformed into purpose. The city continued its endless circulation, millions of souls brushing against each other without quite touching, each carrying the potential for visibility or invisibility, for presence or absence, for remaining or vanishing. And somewhere in those millions, new guides were learning to navigate the spaces between, new forms of existence were evolving, and the ancient dance between predator and prey, visible and invisible, individual and dissolution, continued its evolution. Michael learned to live with the ambiguity, the knowledge that justice in this case didn't mean capture or punishment, but simply understanding, simply seeing what others couldn't or wouldn't see. He'd failed to save Rebecca, but he'd saved Jennifer. He'd failed to capture the guide, but he'd exposed the pattern. On the anniversary of Rebecca's first disappearance, he now thought of it as her translation, he stood at track 61, without glasses, without enhancement, just himself in the abandoned station. He spoke to the empty air, knowing somehow that she could hear across dimensions. I understand now. I don't forgive. I don't condemn. I just understand. Be well, wherever you are in whatever form you've taken. The station remained silent, but something in the quality of that silence seemed peaceful, resolved. The case that had proved evil could vanish into the crowd had also proved that love could persist across dimensions, that truth could emerge from impossible investigations, and that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't catching the predator, but learning to see the prey as something more than victims, as souls making impossible choices in an impossible city, navigating between visibility and invisibility, presence and absence, the unbearable weight of being and the seductive lightness of unbeing. The city hummed on, eternal and evolving, creating and consuming, and Michael Shaw continued his work, a detective who had learned that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, but witnessed, remembered, and honored in their terrible and beautiful complexity.